I'm not gonna lie, I like 60% keyboards. While I know this layout's limitations, such as their reliance on multiple layers for arrows and navigation functions, there's just something about their space-saving qualities, universal keycaps compatibility, and their minimalist look that is still so appealing to me after all these years. While my first experiences with smaller keyboard layouts were on laptops in the early 2000s, it wasn't until 2013 that I would adopt a 60% keyboard as a daily driver, my beloved KB Talking Pure by Vortex, which was also my first aluminum encased keyboard and also my first modern mechanical keyboard, at least by today's standards. And while I mostly shifted to 65 and 75% layouts in the last couple of years, I still keep an eye out for interesting 60% offers, despite the fact that they seem to be getting rarer these days. So when Keymove offered me the chance to review their premium 60% board, the Kemove Ares61, my ears immediately perked up. A wireless 60% board encased in a nice and heavy anodized aluminum case that costs a very competitive $99? I just had to check it out. And as it is customary around here, you know I'll mod the crap out of this beauty to see if we can make it type and sound like a proper typing beast. This video is sponsored by PCBWay. Bring your next product to market with PCBWay's OEM and contract manufacturing services. Check the link in the description below for more information. Hello and welcome to IO Sam. I'm Sam Franco and this is a channel where I do tech reviews and show you how to build, fix and mod all sorts of computer gear. Today we're checking out Keymove's beautiful Ares61 wireless keyboard, which might as well be their first premium metal board. Keymove, by the way, seems to be the more premium brand from the area tech, who is well known these days for offering some of the top-selling budget small form factor keyboards on Amazon. In this video, we'll cover all the main characteristics and features of this board, and then we'll move on to the good stuff, improving the sound and the typing experience of this keyboard. You see, while this thing has a killer look in my opinion, the sound and typing experience here were not exactly up to my standards. But a switch replacement and a few mods later, we went from this to this. So you might want to stick around to the end of this video to see how that transformation happened. In case you're new here, I always break my videos into neatly organized chapters with progress bars on the bottom and top of the screen to help you navigate my videos in case you want to jump to any specific chapter. As a disclaimer, Keymove sent me this keyboard free of any cost for the sole purpose of this video review. But as my viewers already know, my scripts, views, and opinions are always 100% mine, with no inputs or influence from manufacturers, resellers, or their PR teams. I will place affiliate links for this keyboard, as well as other parts and tools I'll show in this video, but while these affiliate links help to support this channel, they do not affect my views and opinions about the products I cover here. The Kemove Ares61 is a 60% wireless, hot swappable keyboard encased in a CNC machined, aircraft-grade aluminum case that you can get in 3 colors: blue, silver, and my sample's gray, which has this awesome dark gunmetal look to it. You can get it with only 2 options of switches, Gateron Reds or Browns, but these are the old style Gaterons and not the newer and improved Gateron Pros or KS series of pre-looped switches. It comes with nice PBT keycaps, which were yellow on gray on my sample, but will have different color schemes depending on the case color you get. The plate is painted steel in white, which helps to reflect the RGB lights, and attaches to screw posts on the bottom case through holes in the PCB, making this a modified tray mounting system. Stabs are plate mounted and come slightly pre-lubed. The PCB has 5 pins, north-facing, hot swappable sockets with RGB illumination and comes in the ANSI configuration with the option to change the bottom row layout between Windows and Mac through the toggle switches on the back. The Kemove Ares61 can be used both wired through USB-C and wireless via 3 simultaneous Bluetooth connections and powered by a generous 3000 mAh battery. It can be configured through Keymove's Control Hub software to configure RGB lights, macros, and keys remapping, among other settings. The kit comes with a braided USB-C cable, nice and usable keycap and switch pullers, and a good user manual in English. Keymove offers a 1-year limited warranty on this board. As for the layout, I know the vast majority of newcomers to the mechanical keyboard scene prefer 65 and 75% keyboards these days, mostly because of the presence of the arrows keys. Although I really like the way Keymove implemented the arrows functions here, by placing the FN key in the bottom right corner, which makes it easy to hold it with your pinky to turn the Alt, Menu, Slash, and Control keys into temporary arrows you can hit with your other 3 fingers in the left hand. Super intuitive and does not require you to be a hand contortionist to access the arrows in the secondary layer. You also have the full navigation cluster in the same arrangement you'd have on a TKL, but here under the second layer on the right side cluster between the letter U and the period keys. Media controls are all in a straight line between the A and the H keys. Overall, this board has a very good secondary functions arrangement. If you are an entrepreneur in the market for a reliable OEM or contract manufacturing partner to help you bring your next product design to life, did you know PCBWay has exactly what you're looking for? If you have a design for lighting, security or medical equipment, home or kitchen appliances, or other types of electronics, PCBWay can manufacture your product under your specifications and help you to bring your creations to market quicker and with higher quality. All while enjoying the flexibility and cost savings that are only possible through OEM economies of scale in PCB production and assembly, injection molding, CNC machining, and sheet metal fabrication. With 11 factories and over 2,800 employees, as well as access to the best component suppliers in the industry, PCBWay is a uniquely qualified one-stop shop that can assist you through the entire process of designing, manufacturing, testing, and packing fully assembled devices that are ready for shipment. Check out the link in the description below for more information and OEM case studies, or to contact PCBWay's team of engineers, designers, and production specialists for a quote. And thanks to PCBWay for their support of this channel and the mechanical keyboards enthusiast community. Now, let's go through this keyboard's parts, features, build quality, and design. The case is by far the main attraction here. Really high quality finish in a head-turning design. This thing is thick and heavy, and the curves on the sides are reminiscent of sports cars' fenders, which looks very unique. The effect of the light hitting this case from different angles is quite a sight on my desk. Here, you get height adjustment feet for 2 positions, also in aluminium, which is a rare occurrence between metal and case keyboards and a very welcome one at that. The USB-C opening is wide enough for most cables and perfectly recessed to hide the metal prong and to give the connector some additional protection against handling accidents that could otherwise damage the PCB's USB plug. The 2 toggle switches in the back to set the Bluetooth and the Windows and Mac layouts are also metal and feel very high quality. My main gripe with the case's design, though, is the center stage branding. While the Keymove logo is in a tasteful darker shade of gray that doesn't immediately become an eyesore, this branding would be better placed elsewhere on the backside or even in the bottom, which is completely clean here. Another interesting choice here was the negative typing angle with the feet retracted. That is quite a novelty to me, since I have never seen this in any non-ergonomic keyboard before. While the angle is a very mild -1 degree, it is noticeable and makes for a very comfortable typing experience that conforms to your hands and your wrist's natural curvature. The bottom case has very grippy rubber pads on all corners, but the height adjustment feet are not rubber tipped. The Ares61's PCB is your average hot swappable affair, with Gateron 5-pins compatible sockets and SMD LEDs under every key with integrated USB-C socket. The difference here are the 2 toggle switches that allow you to turn the Bluetooth signal on and off and to switch between Windows and Mac layouts. Here, you get N-key rollover in both wired and wireless modes, which is very nice. The PCB's controller firmware allows you to configure quite a few backlighting settings through hardware key combinations, in case you don't want to install Keymove software, which is also nice. The Ares61 has pre-programmed RGB modes in hardware and per-key illumination programming through the Keymove Control Hub software. Although, as we'll discuss in a bit, my experience with Keymove's software was a bit complicated. As far as lighting is concerned, you have 16 pre-configured light schemes you can choose either via the FN plus the pipe key combo on the hardware side, or through a menu on the software. You can also set the whole board to a single color through the FN plus caps lock key combo, that will cycle through 8 colors plus 1 multicolor pattern. On the software side is where you can paint your own static RGB schemes, which, while not as fancy as the crazy animations you can create on Razer's Synapse, is enough for you to do the basics like painting mods, numbers, and WASD keys in different colors, for example. My issue here was that the interface for you to select the keys you want to paint is really janky. You can't simply Control-click all the keys you want and then choose their color, for example. You can only click and drag, which means you can only select adjacent keys for each painting operation. And even then, you have to click them in a very specific way or otherwise they don't get selected. You also cannot save your favorite colors. You can only pick from a color wheel, which means you'll have a hard time picking exactly the same color for multiple groups of keys, for example. You can create as many color schemes as you want on the software side, but you can only save up to 5 schemes in the keyboard's memory. Once you save them to memory, you can cycle through them via the Fn plus the right square bracket key. You also get the basics of brightness and lighting mode speed increase and decrease through hardware key combos. The backlighting can be fairly bright and gets helped by the white plate that does a good job in reflecting the RGB lights. The Control Hub software is one of these keyboard's weakest points in my experience, since getting it to work in the first place was a bit of a chore. Right after I received the keyboard, the software would barely work, with 80% of the buttons and functions in it simply not responding or not being saved to the keyboard at all. Then, after I finally managed to complete a firmware update, the software suite started responding. All software functions here are only accessible through the wired connection and not through Bluetooth, which is pretty normal for most keyboards out there anyway. The software allows you to remap keys, create and assign macros, configure RGB lights, deactivate the Windows keys and a few other key combos that could interrupt a running game, and set up RGB light shows that react to music. You can create up to 4 profiles or layers with all your customizations, which you can cycle through the software or through the Fn plus the letters Q, W, E, and R. I'll leave a link to the Kemove K61 user manual in the video description below, which works exactly the same way as the Ares61, if you want to have a better idea of how exactly to program each one of these keyboard's functions through the Control Hub software. But the short version here is this. Everything works, but at the cost of some trial and error and some frustration with its poorly designed user interface. The wireless connection here is Bluetooth only, no 2.4 GHz dongle included, which is fine for what I think this keyboard is designed for, which is to look good and uncluttered while typing. It does offer 3 simultaneous Bluetooth connections, which is awesome to allow you to easily switch between different machines. Although the strength of the wireless signal here suffers inside of this ultra-thick enclosure. I did experience connection issues with my desktop sitting under my desk, where the signal would cut off every once in a while. But with my laptop sitting above my desk and much closer to the keyboard, I had 0 problems. So that is an important thing to consider depending on your desk setup. This keyboard doesn't come with any sound damping of any kind, which explains the hollow and pingy sounds coming out of it in its stock form. And as is the case with the vast majority of metal keyboard cases out there, this keyboard definitely will benefit from 1 or more sound damping mods, as we'll see in the modding chapter. The plate here is painted steel, which is fairly common for production keyboards, and which is not necessarily a bad thing depending on the implementation. The white paint helps to reflect the light, which is good, and the paint job seems fairly robust, to the point of not getting scratched with my switch pullers, which is great. The plate attaches directly to the bottom case through 6 screw posts that go through holes on the PCB in a modified tray mount design, which is fine for a production keyboard, since top-mounted and gasket-mounted designs are still mostly in the realm of much more expensive custom keyboards at this point in time. Interestingly, there was no screw post under the hole in the top left corner, which I realized it wasn't possible anyway, since the case's height adjustment mechanism underneath did not allow a screw post to be placed there. So this indicates to me that this plate and PCB combo were designed for a different case. Luckily, I didn't feel any wobbling or instability when pressing keys on the top left corner. Another curious design choice here was the fact that the plate and the PCB have no attachment points other than the switches, which is weird, considering that this is a hot swap assembly where the PCB is supposed to hang from the plate without any contact or support from the keyboard case's bottom. It is not uncommon in the custom keyboards world to have plate and PCB with no attachment points other than the switches, but that is usually with solder-only PCBs, where you know the PCB and the plate will be locked together by the soldered switches, which is obviously not the case here with a hot swap PCB, where the switches are not permanently attached to their sockets. While the lack of hard attachments between the plate and the PCB gives the assembly a tiny bit more room to flex, it has another important downside. If you remove all the switches, the PCB will basically drop to the bottom of the case, and you will not be able to install new switches without first removing the plate and the PCB and then holding them together while you install the new switches, which is not practical for the vast majority of people who would buy a hot swappable keyboard to try new switches. So while this keyboard is technically hot swappable, you will have to remove the plate and PCB assembly every time you need to replace all the switches. And while that is a usually recommended procedure for any hot swappable keyboard anyway, to ensure you don't damage the hot swap sockets if you press the switch with its pins misaligned, here it would be a necessity, given this keyboard's design. The stabs in the Ares61 are plate mounted, which is usually inferior to PCB mounted ones, but these are surprisingly good. Even though they were not heavily lubed, the stems were very tight with the housings, and they had almost no rattle, which is always a welcome thing in any production keyboard. I did end up clipping and re-lubing the stabs with my own Krytox mix to improve it even further, as we'll see in the modding chapter. But the stabs here were a positive surprise in this keyboard, even in their stock state, despite being plate mounted. The included keycaps are good and reasonably thick if compared to the vast majority of stock keycaps on production keyboards these days. These are double-shot PBT in OEM profile, and the contrast between the yellow fonts on the gray background is pretty good. Not as good as what you get on the more premium ePBT Yoke set in ABS I'm showing here though, since ABS always takes the cake on the color saturation aspect. But overall, I like the stock set. The keys feel good, sound good, have decent legends, and will age much better than most ABS sets included with production keyboards out there. The keyboard measures 31 centimeters in width, 11.7 centimeters in depth, 2.5 centimeters in height on the front side, 2.4 centimeters in height on the back side with the feet retracted, and 3.3 centimeters with the feet extended. The inclination angles are either -1 with the feet retracted or a very mild 4 degrees with the feet extended when measured on top of the third row of the stock OEM profile keycaps. The keyboard is fairly heavy for its size, weighing 1.16 kilograms or 2 pounds and 9 ounces with stock switches and keycaps. Even though the height adjustment feet don't have rubber tips, this keyboard is heavy enough that it will not slide in your desk even if you push it quite vigorously. This board has a rather polarizing look. I really liked it for being so bold and different from everything else out there, but I'm sure some people will hate it for those very same reasons. But regardless, I applaud Keymove here for trying something different. In a sea of rectangles out there, it is refreshing to see some edgy designs such as this every once in a while. The combination of the gunmetal color of the case with the yellow and gray keycaps looks fantastic in my opinion, and were the main reason why this keyboard immediately stood out when I first saw it. Alright, so let's hear how the Kemove Ares61 sounds in its stock configuration. Well, that doesn't sound very good, does it? First, the stock switches really do this keyboard a disservice. These might have been the worst get-arounds I have ever tried. They were scratchy and had some of the most disturbing spring noises I ever heard on any switch before. I don't know where Keymove got these get-arounds, but I suspect these might be from an ancient batch, since Get-Around has been putting out some incredibly smooth budget switches for a very long time now, so these definitely have to go. And the other problem here was the lack of sound damping, which makes this board sound hollow and pingy at the same time. The only good thing this keyboard had going for it in its stock form were its stabs, which feel surprisingly good and have pretty much no rattle. So here I was confident I would not have to replace these. After removing the stock switches and the 6 screws attaching the plate to the case, I had to unplug the battery JST cable that was incredibly tight. Then, the first thing to do was to cut a thin 1.5mm sheet of silicone to line the bottom of the case. I cut around the battery and screw posts with a box cutter and scissors. The second step was to tape the bottom of the PCB to help with the sound of the switches I had planned to install on this board. One layer was enough here. I cut gaps around the battery plug, the controller chip, and the PCB holes where the screw posts would go through to attach to the plate. The third step was to clip the flexible legs of the stabilizer stems with a flush cutter, and then lube both the stems and housings with my mix of 50/50 Krytox 205 grade 2 grease with 105 oil. For the wires, I went with the tried and true Krytox XHT BDZ. I also applied pieces of medical tape to one side of the plate cutouts for the spacebar stabs, just to make sure their houses would sit tight and not wiggle. Before I installed the switches, I placed the 6 screws in their plate holes and secured them with 4x1mm O-rings on the other side that would be sandwiched between the plate and the case screw posts to eliminate metal-on-metal friction. That is always a good trick with tray mount boards to improve the sound and give an extra millimeter of travel between the plate and the case. The switches I chose for this project were Tecsee Ice Candy linears with nylon stems that are completely translucent and have long stem poles that would not only sound poppy, but also allow the use of some cherry keycaps, such as GMK sets, since long stem pole switches can give just enough clearance to avoid interference on north-facing PCBs, such as the one in the Ares61. These switches have polycarbonate top and bottom housings, and a 2-stage spring that gives it a 63.5 grams bottom-out force. The long stem pole gives the switch a slightly shorter than average travel distance of 3.8 millimeters. These are a real bargain at 48 cents per unit considering their great performance. After lubing them with my Krytox mix and filming them with Durock 0.15mm switch films, these things feel buttery smooth and wonderfully clacky when typing. But just an important note on the use of switches with long stem poles with cherry profile keycaps and north-facing keyboards. There are lots of variants on both switches' stem pole length and cherry keycap south side clearance on the third row. As you can see here, both Tecsee Ice Candy and Prevail Keys Nebula switches, for example, have no problem in the north-facing orientation with this GMK Space Cadet third row keycap. But then, just the Tecsee clears drops thick artifact bloom, and both switches clash with EPBT's Yoch set. So, you should always research the combination of switches and cherry profile keycaps you intend to use on north-facing keyboards before you pull the trigger, if you want to avoid potential third-row interference issues. To install the switches on the Ares61, I had to hold the plate and PCB together with one hand while installing the switches with the other, since as I explained it earlier, there are no attachment points between the plate and the PCB. After installing the switches, I just reattached the battery cable and placed the whole assembly back into the case, ensuring the toggle switches on the PCB would line up with their respective metal buttons on the back of the case, and the small O-rings were kept in place during the process of attaching the screws. And the final step here was to replace the included PBT keycaps with the similarly colored ACO black and gold set in the ASA profile. This one is also double-shot PBT, but it is thicker and has better legends than the Keymove stock set. The ASA profile is a bit more spherical than the stock OEM, but it has the same height. So this set should work with any switch on any north-facing keyboard with no problems. These keycaps are an incredible deal for its $60 price, considering the thickness, the quality of the legends, and the compatibility with basically any layout out there. Not to mention the beautiful and extremely useful storage case these switches came in, which makes GMK's papier-mâché janky boxes feel like a bad joke in comparison. Especially when considering that GMK sets usually cost twice as much as the ACO. So, let's check out how the Kemove Ares61 sounds now with the lubed and filmed Tecsee Ice Candy switches, plus all the sound damping mods I did, with the stock PBT caps and with the ACO black and gold set. sounds like a completely different keyboard. The Tecsee switches sound fantastic here. They feel incredibly smooth, but with a crisp bottom out. And the sound damping mods eliminated all traces of ping and hollowness from the case. This keyboard now has the sound and the typing feel to match its good looks. So, what are my conclusions about the Kemove Ares61 and all the mods I did to it? While the typing feel and sound of this keyboard in its stock form is underwhelming to say the least, its potential for greatness is definitely there, as we saw after the mods I did here. In stock form, no. The scratchy stock switches and the case hollow and pingy sounds are definitely nothing to write home about. But as long as you're willing to get your hands a bit dirty here and install some basic sound damping mods, and then replace the stock switches with better quality ones, you could definitely get above average typing feel and sound from this board for another $30 to $50 on top of the Ares61 current price. After my mods here, the keyboard now feels smooth to type on, but with very well defined bottom out on both regular and stabilized keys. Obviously, this is not a flexy or bouncy board for hammer finger typists out there. If that is you, you know you have to go much higher up in the price tiers to get to the trampoline keyboards that kids rave about these days. But if you type with normal force and proper technique, you might not need all that shock absorption to begin with. The sound of this modded board is perfectly clean and pleasant, even though it's more on the clacky side. Hey, let's give the clack some love too. We can't let the thok get all the attention now, huh? Granted, a lot of the poppy sound I'm getting out of this modded board comes from the long stem pole switch I picked here. And the good news is that the market is now flooded with good options for long stem pole MX switches. From super price competitive options from ACO and KTT, all the way to the more premium JWK boutique options from small vendors out there, you're bound to find a linear or tactile long stem pole switch to fit your needs. The quality discussion can be broken in 3 different segments. The basic chassis here is solid for what you're paying. The case is top-notch quality, probably on the same level or higher than some customs costing multiple times its price. This thing will last you a lifetime. The PCB and plate assembly are well built, but the fact they were clearly not designed with this case in mind leaves something to be desired here. The lack of attachment points between the plate and the PCB was my main gripe, and should be one of your main considerations since you will probably have to disassemble this board to be able to replace its stock switches. Speaking of the stock switches, this is the next category and probably the lowest point of this keyboard on the hardware side. They feel bad and they sound bad, so think of them here as placeholders for aftermarket switches, and don't buy this keyboard if you're not willing to replace them for something better. And finally, the software was clearly an afterthought here. While everything works, the overall user interface is unintuitive and the learning curve is steep. So, if you need to use macros that are easy to record and edit, for example, you'll be better off with a separate programmable numpad or macro pad, or with another keyboard with better software implementation. But are you getting real value for $99 here? Well, I'd say it depends on your expectations, naturally, and what you intend to use this keyboard for. If you look at this product as the basis for something you can build upon, and consider the quality of the parts of the hardware mix that really matter here, namely the chassis and the PCB, in comparison with other similarly priced products out there, and even with much more expensive custom quality metal cases, then yeah, I can totally say there is real value here if you can check all these boxes. You like 60% keyboards, you like this keyboard's default firmware configurations for layout and backlighting, you value wireless connectivity, you like its crazy looking design, you're getting this for typing more than gaming, and lastly, but possibly most importantly, you're willing to replace its stock switches. My advice here would be this: don't look at this as a $99 keyboard. Be more realistic and add up another $30 to $50 of switches, lubricant, and other sound damping materials you need to bring this keyboard up to its full potential. This way, you're guaranteed not to feel cheated in the end. Needless to say, the market for small form factor mechanical keyboards has never been more competitive than now. Having said that, we all know that the vast majority of products in this area, at least in the mass-produced segment, are not very good. But if you look at some of the top-selling offerings, specifically in the wireless 60% keyboard segment, such as the wildly successful N Pro line, for example, which sells for not much less than the Ares61, while still having a rather pedestrian plastic case and much smaller battery, I'd say the Keymove offering here is very competitive. While I know the N Pro has better software, if you don't care too much about that aspect of product customization, there is a real case to be made for the Keymove here. Again, it all depends on what you want to use a 60% keyboard for. I know that the largest group of people still interested in 60% keyboards these days are gamers, simply because this is still arguably the best layout for gaming, since it has the minimum you need for gaming and nothing of what you don't need. And while you could certainly use the Ares61 for gaming, since the hardware is solid and does have N-key rollover, I think the software deficiencies here will put off many gamers, and I don't blame them. If gaming is your number one application for a 60% keyboard, I think you'd be better off with the cheaper N Pro 2 on the budget end, or with the undisputed gaming king right now, the Wowstick 60HE on the other more premium side. Both these boards have better software than the Keymove. The Wowstick, in fact, has not only the best software of any keyboard I have ever used, bar none, but it is also loaded with the latest tech and low latency gaming peripherals. Sure, the Wowstick costs twice as much as the Keymove when factoring in shipping, and will take a while for you to get it, since Wowstick is still offering the 60HE in pre-ordering phase at this moment in 2022. But if you're really serious about getting the best keyboard for gaming, with no performance compromises, I'd say it would be worth to save a bit more money and go for the best. On the other hand, if you just want a sharp-looking wireless 60% that can type and sound great after a few mods, then the Ares61 could easily be a fantastic option for you. So, after all these considerations, I think we have a pretty clear picture of who I think this keyboard could be a good fit for. Anyone who wants a super aesthetic keyboard that will look even cleaner when used with no wires, anyone who is not afraid to open a keyboard, cut some pieces of tape, silicone or foam and replace switches, and anyone who's adamant in getting their online shopping delivered to them as fast as possible. If you fit this profile, this might be the 60% keyboard for you. In my IOSM market segments chart, while this keyboard is priced as a performance product, its high-quality case alone pushes it up to be a borderline premium board. And finally, the availability matter here is possibly one of this keyboard's stronger points. You can't just go to Amazon right now and get it for its current $99 price. That's simple. No complicated group buys, no risk of dealing with small and unknown vendors, no long shipping times from across the world, and the guarantee of being able to return it within 30 days if you don't like it. I know for a fact that for a large swath of the consumer market out there, this is a really big deal. Alright, any questions? You know what to do. Just leave them in the comments below or on my IOSM subreddit and I'll be happy to help you. Meanwhile, if you want to check my recent review of Gloria's new wireless programmable numpad, click here. Or click here to see my crazy project to recreate a vintage sounding keyboard in 2022 using only brand new parts. Thanks again and see you all soon.